So we start with any study, I think, with what is questions, and with literature, we have to say, okay, well, what is literature? And I think the first point of departure is you're studying literature. You're studying it as part of the humanities. Okay, so we can distinguish between that and other disciplines, which are studying natural sciences, social sciences, and then finally, as I said, humanities. So if we start with natural sciences, the simplest way of thinking about that is it's the study of the way of beings, the way things are as a whole. So all the things in the cosmos, their causes, their behavior. Now with social sciences, we have a study of the way of human beings, their thought and behavior, what makes them tick and move and react. And with the humanities, we have the study of the ways humans articulate meaning. So whether it's through texts, and that predominantly I would say humanities is study of texts, but also music, musical notation, visual arts. These are ways in which hu humans have used different forms of scratching things down on paper or on cave walls or whatever the media is now to try to articulate meaning. So humanities study what it means to be human, and this need to, let's say, create a meaningful articulation of the world seems to be, for the humanist, a defining aspect of what it means to be human. So gathering the disparate phenomena of existence into a meaningful whole, an articulated whole is that exercise of creating a meaningful articulation of the world. Other aspects of human existence, so we eat, we reproduce, we are biological entities. These we share with animals, right? So that's not a distinctive feature from the humanist perspective of what makes us human. Now, also we reason, we calculate. If reasoning, if we reduce it merely to calculation, well, a machine can do that. Increasingly, artificial intelligence can do it very well. Now, what makes, again, the human activity distinctive would be this creation of a meaningful articulation of a whole. Now, the humanities, as the study of the articulation of meaning, one of the disciplines within the humanities is literature. Okay, so literature then implies a recognition of an underlying intention or purpose or significance behind the apparently chaotic occurrences within the cosmos. So the assumption with these humanist pursuits is that there is some sort of purpose or significance underlying the chaos of the cosmos. That's not necessarily the case in every approach to phenomena, right? If the physicist might see these things as just products of statistical probabilities or randomness. So the humanist, in order to be able to articulate a meaningful articulation of the whole, has to say that there's structure and meaning there, okay, in some way. So in that point of departure, perhaps we see a bit of, let's say, the roots of what we could call a crisis of the humanities. The humanities in the last few decades have, there's been repeatedly this call that the humanities are under crisis, this question of their value proposition in today's world, question of why one would, let's say, pursue a major in the humanities, study it, why society should fund humanist endeavors. This is part of this crisis of the humanities. What is the value proposition of that pursuit? And I would say, if we take this lens at it, it's tied to that, let's say, crisis of nihilism more broadly. Now, I have a couple of videos on nihilism. So, what is nihilism? That type of thing. So, I'll put a link in the description. But basically, since the around the turn of the 20th century, you could say we've the Western world in particular has encountered this crisis of nothing having meaning, nothing having, or a denial of the sense that there is a significance, a purpose, an underlying intention to existence as a whole. Okay, so potentially those two crises are connected. Now, so we've said the humanities are the study of the articulation of meaning. Literature is a discipline within the humanities as the study of the articulation of meaning. But what is literature then, and exactly, and how does it relate to the articulation of meaning? So, most broadly, the term literature, it's we get that word from Latin, which just means writing formed with letters. So technically speaking, any written text is literature in the broadest definition. But what we study in university, we usually try to think of literature as a smaller subset, let us say, of all written material. We don't study, generally speaking, in literature classes, anything written willy-nilly. We say, okay, no, this is literature because there's something special about it. What is it about that that makes it literature as opposed to, let's say, a car manual, in my example here? So most often, traditionally, there's been a sense, well, it has to be part of a creative, imaginative process, whereas the car manual in some way is not a creative, imaginative. It's a more procedural or transactional work, right? So this creative aspect of literature was identified as far back as the Greek. So the Greek word for poetry comes from poesis, which means making or creating, and was tied to this kind of imaginative, creative aspect. So to to define literature, then I would hazard the following definition: a linguistic usage by which meaningful possibilities of a world are articulated for the first time. Okay. And in defining it this way, there are some echoes to the Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky, who coined this term for literature and to some extent art, generally the function of art and literature being defamiliarization. So he describes this process of taking something or an activity or a thing in the world that has become familiar to us and every day, and it almost passes by without notice. And the work of art brings it forth for the first time in a new way, and we notice it and we notice new aspects about it. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it, a good point of departure. So if we take that point of departure, we can oppose literary discourse to, or literary language to ordinary language and ordinary discourse. So with ordinary language, we have communication that is the exchange of already determined meanings or values. So they've already been delineated. We don't think about them too much. So an example of this ordinary language or everyday discourse might be someone might say, I have been hurt in intimate relationships in the past, in a very kind of a very say matter of fact way. Someone might say something like that. And here, all of the terms of that sentence are taken as pre-given. They're not questioned in any way. So the speaker assumes that the audience knows what hurt means, what relationships means. Each of those terms, they're just passed like coins and not thought of. In literary discourse, one might say, love is a red, red rose. Its blossoms die early, but its thorns linger. So here, through metaphor, an aspect of love is revealed for the first time. So this metaphor, this comparison, we'll talk a bit more about metaphor later, but a metaphor bringing together two things, two images, two concepts, comparing them without using like or as, right? So the like or as, that would be a simile, right? To remember your high school days. So here in the quote, love is a red, red rose. It's not like a red, red rose. It is a red, red rose. So here the author's trying to, I think you could say that author would want the reader to bring forth an aspect of love for the first time. That it's beautiful, it's like a rose, it's beautiful, but it also is painful. Like rose, it has thorns, right? So it's natural, it grows, it had so there with that comparison, all those aspects of love, the image of love can be brought forth in a new way for the first time. Okay, so literature creates new meanings by making these kind of connections and uncovering different layers of meaning through, we could say, using language in new ways, bringing out the beauty in the world it describes, defining eternal aspects of human experience. This is an important point, and this is what makes, let's say, that when we talk about the great works of the literary tradition, they're works that have stood the test of time. They're works that people will read, and there'll be historical differences, and maybe it uses some words, some old-fashioned words that people don't understand anymore. Shakespeare, for instance, everyone's struggled with that in high school. But there's some aspect of human experience that is eternal, that's revealed there in a very, say, crystallizing way. Um, it's literature is directing, not simply reflecting social and human life and society. So it's directing in the sense that it makes a claim on us. It's revealing, it's challenging us to see the world in a new way and maybe inspire us to behave differently, to think differently. And in this sense, literature in its highest calling is educating, not just entertainment. So um, sometimes, well, people read, novels are still around at airports because or people are read them uh, kind of not page turner novels at a beach still. This happens because that's entertaining literature. Um, and that is one function of literature. Horace said literature should teach as well as delight. And this educating function is a key component of literature that I think what we see in the manifestation of literature as pulp fiction, as pulp literature, is an aspect that is, let's say, forgotten. So I mentioned that this metaphoric function is incredibly important. So one of the ways of making connections, making articulating new meanings for experience is through comparison. So literature makes comparisons. And a key way it does that is through metaphor. So metaphor and simile. So metaphor comes from Greek metapherein. So meta is across or over or on, and pherein is carrying. So it's kind of literally carrying from one place to another. So a metaphor is carrying this image and bringing it over. So the rose over to love and saying, here, they're similar. Um, so it's a figure of speech in which one term is described in terms of another. As I mentioned, simile is one where the same comparison is happening with like or as. So an example of a metaphor, famous example from Shakespeare's As You Like It, Jake Weiss says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players. He doesn't say all the world is like a stage. He says it is a stage. And so our lives are as ephemeral, as kind of unreal, as much of a fabrication as a stage play. And I could go on that. There's a lot of implications to that metaphor because it makes us think about life in a new way. And that's what metaphors do. Uh, we have, with a comparison, we can have a metaphor. We can also have a simile. So a simile is a comparison using like as and as. And the special form of simile is this epic simile. So in the genre of epics, um, I'll put a link to my introduction to Homer in the description where I go into what is epic a bit more and epic simile a bit more. But in epics, which try to be expansive, epics try to cover uh, the greatest stories of a culture and try to be summative in a way of what is important about both the story, about that hero, the model of heroism, but also as a reflection of the cosmos and life itself. So the simile becomes expansive. So the simile is not just, love is like a rose. It's love is like those roses that grow on that hill that that so many times the hero had to trudge up to et cetera, et cetera. So you can use that simile as a way to bring forth a whole new world. And it's an amazing literary device that we find in epics. So Homer, we find it, Virgil's Aeneid, we find it in Paradise Lost by Milton, Dante's Divine Comedy. So look for those if you're reading those greatest of the great works. Here's an example from Homer's Odyssey of what I'm talking about. So this is from the episode in Homer's Odyssey where uh, Odysseus is trapped with his crew in the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus. So they've come upon a plan where where they've gotten the Cyclops drunk, and now they have this large pole which they've sharpened, heated in the fire, and they're going to blind the Cyclops' soul eye as he's passed out there. So here goes the description. Straight forward they've sprinted, lifted it, and rammed it deep in his crater eye. And I leaned on it, turning it, as a shipwright turns a drill in planking, having men below to swing the two-handled strap that spins in the groove. So, with our brand, we bored the great eye socket, while blood ran out around the red-hot bar. Eyelid and lash were seared, the pierced ball hissed, broiling, and the roots popped. In a smithy, one sees a white-hot axe head or an adze, plunged and wrung in a cold tub, screeching steam, the way they make soft iron hale and hard. Just so that eyeball hissed around the spike. So we have actually two epic similes there. So the first one, and I've tried to underline I've tried to highlight them in blue there, the words making the epic simile. Um, and often you'll get this structure in an epic. Okay, so they're putting the pole in this Cyclops eye, and he says they were turning it as so just as a shipwright turns a large drill in planking, having men below to swing the strap that spins it in the groove. So they're putting this big drill or mast through holes in a ship. Um, and just as that is done by shipwrights, so too, and here's our follow-up, with our brand, we board that great eye socket. Okay, so it takes this heroic act. This is what happens often in the Homer's epic similes, is the heroic act of someone who's so legendary and should be inspiring for the reader. But we say, how when I never see Cyclops in my daily routine, how can I show that kind of heroism? But the epic simile is saying, just as you know, you're about your day-to-day business, putting something into the mast into the hole in a ship, so too we did these things. Your heroism can be compared to ours. Your heroism in going about your day-to-day tasks is in some ways, although on a lower order, can be, you can see yourself reflected in the great deeds of an Odysseus. And then we have the second simile, um, in a smithy, just as what's implied there as is just as in a smithy. So in a smith, a blacksmith takes a white hot axe head and plunges it into a cold tub, and the water hisses. Just so that eyeball hissed around the spike.